Daniel Medina. I'm with Investors Advantage. For those of you who don't know us, we are a financial planning and money management firm out of Westlake Village, California. We are located in Westlake and been there for over the last 30 years, and happy to say we'll be there for at least another 10. For those of you who haven't visited our website, please make sure you take a look at our website. John often does interviews he's been on Yahoo, Fox, TD Ameritrade Today, I believe, and you can see all of his interviews there. Some have over 30 or 50,000 views, so make sure you check it out. And here's John.
Thanks, Daniel. And Daniel, delighted that he's been associated. He does the math. He's my main math man, and it's going on 14 years. And like you said, we're just getting started. In fact, we just signed a 5-year lease, got new flooring and paint, and of course, now nobody can come into the office, so who cares? And then you'll also get a chance to meet Jasmine Alvarado. She went to, imagine this, Midland University on a wrestling scholarship. Only lady I know who went to anywhere on a wrestling scholarship. So that's kind of interesting. And then she is a mom, and number 3 is on the way. So she's trying to help us expand this economy best she can in many ways. So let's look at our topic, get past the legalese, look at our agenda, and we'll talk about the market for a minute, and then get into the meat of the matter. And part of that includes some time with Terri Hilliard Olson, who is an attorney who does a lot of work. We've referred clients her way to help families figure out what do you do with mom and dad and be able to talk to each other about it, right? And not feel guilty. So we're going to discuss one of the things that I would submit that the securities industry has been really good at is conveying one message: buy and hold and hope, sit and take it. That's the message we've conveyed. And I'm not sure that works for every situation, so we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about our recommendations that apply for now to inoculate your portfolio against COVID-19 or any other pandemic or hurricane or analogy you'd like to apply. How can you stay in the game without having the necessity for a Hail Mary pass just to get back in the game? And then we'll open up for questions and answers after Terri brings us up to date on her 5 success tips with aging parents and the elderly and the near elderly. So, what's going on right now is you hear a lot of the talking heads talking about what kind of recovery there might be. And I don't know if you saw just last Sunday, 60 Minutes with Chairman Jerome Powell was being interviewed by Scott Pelley. And they used letters like V and W and U and M, a Nike swoosh. And you know what I'm saying? And you'll find this. I'm saying it might be something like we've seen in the past, an L-shaped recovery. We've had 2 of those. I can get into the details, but let me bring you up to date, because as Chairman Powell identified, people are simply fascinated by the possibility of different letters. And many times we wear these rose-colored glasses and we drink this funny this funny recipe Kool-Aid just to imagine, well, it's just got to get back to the way it was. Maybe not, but we want to be prepared either way. But this shape of the recovery will take is nevertheless a top-of-mind concern for investors, especially given the market's recent rally. Now, looks like it's a rally every day, and yet we remain in negative territory for the year. And these letters are, after all, the simplest framework for many investors trying to understand that the incredibly uncertain future might look like. Now, in the latest, I just saw this today, Global Fund Manager Survey by Bank of America Global Research put this question to 194 participants who manage over $500 billion collectively. And the results were clear. Hardly anyone is betting on a V-shaped recovery. Let me be more definitive. Just 10% of the respondents, again, 194 participants managing about $500 billion, are expecting a V-shaped recovery, 10%. BofA also said that in its note, adding that just 25% believe this current rally is part of a new bull market. So we've been saying on TD America Trade today, I said, I think we're ahead of ourselves. This may be a head fake. That's what I suspect. Be very judicious. And now might be the time to put some cash into the equation to be able to do some buying as prices decline. 75% of those respondents expect the recovery will be U or W, and 68%, this is important, of the respondents thinks that what we're seeing, the stock market right now, is in a bear market rally. That's what bear market rallies do. They're, as I say, like a head fake. They make you think everything is fine, and then it turns around and bites you in the rear end. So let's look at the investment styles. And the one on the left is the stalwart. That has been the only way to go since I've been in the business since 1979. And you would think in the securities industry, nothing has changed. There's been no technological advancements, no new thinking. All we said from then till now is buy and hold, hold and hope, sit and take it. That's all we got for you. So we'll look at how we quantify this particular way of investing and help you understand our perspective as to when it might work and when it might, what was your friend becomes your foe. So it is a lower cost, and it is a way to hold static investments. We'll show you an example of that. Pretty much it's 60% stocks, 40% bonds, or the reversal of that. Some combination of that. It's typically stocks, bonds, and cash. That's the world. Everybody understands you want low cost and index. And I'm going to say to you, that works just fine as long as the market keeps going up. Maybe not when the market's going down, depending on your situation at that time. And so because it's been a huge hit with investors, it's really popular. But there have been other companies that have come to the table with a new way of looking at things and a new way, or certainly a different way, of managing money. So we call it a combination of being active and tactical. And I will say, just to kind of put it in your framework, because this is, you don't hear these ads. These companies, for the most part, do not advertise, all right? But the way I would help you frame it is to think like the movie Karate Kid, wax on, wax off. So if you started the year in 2008, 60, 80, 100% stocks, and by year end 2008, you were 60, 80, 100% cash, then you might have seen or experienced a decline of maybe something like 20% or less, when the market for that year was off 37%, and some positions, popular ETFs and mutual funds, were off 40% or more, on the way to a market decline as of March 8th, 2009, from 1108, a decline of about 57%. Just do the math there. Holding the same position, not taking any withdrawals, $1 million from peak to the trough March 8th, 1108 to March 8th, 2009, means a $570,000 loss, 57% on $1 million. Have a nice day. So then we'll look at it from the standpoint if you were taking withdrawals. And because of the way that these folks work with the tactical and the active management, so what you wanted, in 08 was to wax off. In other words, get out of risk assets in a bad year, and then it wax on back into risk assets in a good year. Reducing the shares, from actually selling the shares and going to cash in 08, doubling down on the shares, buying as much as you possibly can in 09. That combination, by the way, has been shown in many cases to see a loss of, let's say, no less than 20%. These are real numbers. And by the way, the real number on the upside was 25% or more. So that means those investors who invested in that manner had more money in a couple of years or so than the folks who had the passive accounts, where it often took 3, 4, maybe even close to 5 years just to get back to even in a very robust environment. So the goal with the active management is to limit losses during negative volatility. Okay, so let's look at how that might appear. And this is a very graphic form. And notice we're going to say that buy and hold always works when you're young or you don't need the money. And let's spend a minute there, because a lot of times people say, well, based on age. No, if you don't care what the money turns out to be, what does age have to do with it? If it goes from 0 to a zillion, doesn't matter. If it goes from a zillion to 0, doesn't matter. That's the real question, irrespective of age. Age is a component, but I'm going to submit that it's not the primary driver. The risk is the primary driver, and most of us don't recognize how to assess risk. And frankly, I'll apologize again for my peers. We ask you, are you conservative, moderate, or aggressive? And the truth is, I don't understand what those terms mean, and neither do you. So we like to use different terms, ones that might make a little more sense to both me and you. So when you don't need the money, who cares what the account does? While you're working and continue to make contributions, certainly we want the losses when we're making contributions, because we don't need the money now, and we want to see the gains on more shares as we make contributions. And when you're retired with guaranteed income, this kind of position can work real well, because you have, like real solid pensions, and that's a question mark for most of us. The pensions aren't as solid as we'd like to believe they are. But if we have real solid pensions, then again, we're not so invested or concerned about how the account may turn out, because the pension and the Social Security is providing the majority of the income. Everything else is pretty much optional. Now, when it comes to active, notice that everything's moving. That would be activity, all right? So let's go back to our example of, say you were 70 years old, at which point you needed to take out 3.65% of your traditional IRA or traditional retirement account. Let's just round that off to 3.0, so that's $30,000. Going back to our example, starting January 08 with $1 million, market hurricane took away 570,000. You needed income of 30,000. That's pretty modest, 30,000 in America. That's not going to go very far. Now the drawdown from peak to trough was $1 million. 570 plus 30, that's 600,000 to the minus, leaving you with a balance of 400,000. Have a nice day. Buy and hold and hope, sit and take it. No, we want to limit the losses. And here's what we're talking about is mitigating risk. You can see, for example, just to look at that top area, that's representative of how many of our clients' accounts have been playing, if you will, with this particular structure. That back in 2015 on the left, the portfolio was what, 25, 30 or so % in US equity. But notice how as US equities got stronger, the position of US equities got larger. And then notice at the bottom, that would be alternative investments like liquid currencies, commodities, things that are not stocks, bonds, or cash. That rose and fell as other positions rose and fell. So the best way I can put it, it's we want to put our clients' money in a place. Thank you for entrusting us with your life savings. And we charge everyone who has anything to do with their money to ask and answer this question. Is it risk on or is it risk off? Are we putting coal on this fire or do we need to put water on this fire? It's getting too hot. Move my money off the tracks. Let the railroad train run, and then we can get back on the tracks when things look a little more to the upside, where we're looking for a melt up. Everybody loves the melt up, but it's that meltdown that scares people right out of their seats and makes them very, very nervous. And what we're saying is get nervous and pull your hair out about something else other than your money, because if we can keep your losses limited, it's not as important to you because it's not affecting you as it is everyone else. So if we were to draw this line between the left and the right, we would say buy and hold, again, is always great for young people, let's say age 40 with a couple of kids, trying to get their good income and they're trying to save for retirement. By the way, I think this COVID-19 might be good for us from the standpoint, for the first time since the Great Depression, people are going to save. People are starting to save for the first time ever, as opposed to spend, baby, spend. And if you have 30 years for retirement, as I say, when you're making contributions to your account and prices are going down, it's kind of like getting more shells on the seashore when the tide goes out. You collect those in your box or barrel or bucket, and then get out of the way when the tide comes in. So as the prices are going down and we can buy more shares because the price is lower, that's a good thing, particularly if we don't need this money for 20, 30, or 40 years. And hopefully the prices will be higher, or at least higher than we bought in as we were buying lower 20, 30, or 40 years ago. On the other hand, for that retired couple, now the question becomes, how do we limit the losses so you don't need that Hail Mary pass? We sit with people and we ask them this question: what kind of loss can you live with? And we'll show you a little video of that, all of 2 minutes, to kind of make the case for you in a very simple way. So when we get to the place where we want to try to live off the money, we want to account for Social Security and any pensions, and then try to keep the withdrawal rate at 4% of the amount that's invested. So if you said to me, John, I need $40,000 out in a year, how much do I need to invest today? I would say, well, let's see what we can do to get 5, 6, 7% as a return. Keep the withdrawal level at no more than 4%. Lower is even better. But if it's at 4 and we're at $1 million, then that would be $40,000 out. So that would be a good way of being able to assess how much money do I need today to provide the same income level tomorrow. And of course, if we have time, this is not for 5, 10, or 15 years, we have to account for inflation. So let us show you the little video that we did that we think really helps people get a sense of what we're talking about. Okay, so I'm sorry about the lack of sound. What we'll do when we're done is send this video to you so you can see it, on your own time. You're welcome to share it. I encourage you to do that. It's a two-part process. As I say, it's all of 2 minutes. And I think it makes a good case. Of course, it's our work, so I'm going to think it makes a good case. But the second part is where you get to plug in your numbers. In other words, there's a series of questions that we're going to pose in our little questionnaire that we're going to send you at the close of this, where you can find out what kind of loss you can accept, whether it's in percentages or in dollar amounts. And that way, for example, when we sat down with one client and looked at their portfolio, they assessed that they could accept an 8% risk or 8% loss of their account. Then we had the ability to go back and look at their portfolio as though there had been no changes. And with the popular mutual funds and exchange traded funds that they own, they discovered for the first time that in '08, assuming we kept the same positions to make it apples to apples as a comparison, when the market was off 37%, the companies that they have invested a lot of money in and have a lot of name recognition, market's off 37, those positions were off 42. And they looked at each other, go, I can't tell you what they said, but you can imagine what they said. Oh, shucks, something like that. We don't need to do that again, particularly since we're going to have to start taking money in a couple of years for the first time. And these are traditional retirement accounts. So the government requires, the IRS requires us to increase our withdrawals every year. You go, boy, you guys know exactly what you're talking about here. So now let's prepare a second portfolio to compare, as I mentioned, side by side. And we go back and we find that that portfolio, the proposed portfolio, was off about 7%. Remember, their limit was 8. Now they get to really see that might work. There are no guarantees, but if in the case where we were willing to live with an 8% loss and our portfolio as it has been was off more than even the market and much more than what we wanted to lose, or participating where the loss is 7% is less than 8%. If that happens again, and of course it won't be perfect just like that ever again, forever, we can probably live with that. And that's the point. We want to help folks get a sense for how can we live with the money we have and not worry about it. We have enough to worry about, especially with COVID-19. So here are our 3 essential steps to inoculate your portfolio. I don't care if it's a pandemic, a hurricane, a flood, call it what you will. Bad things happen to good people. So we want to be more diversified than you've ever been before. As I say, in most people's portfolios, it's some combination of cash, bonds, and stocks, and that's all it is. So we want more than 3 legs under your stool. Some institutions like Yale, for example, we count 7 or 8 legs underneath their stool. And we're saying that more legs is better for a more stable stool to sit on with our assets. And do real planning. Don't just put the money somewhere and cheer when it goes up and cry when it goes down. Figure out, what you're trying to do both now and in the future, because the real question is, if I have not retired, how much money do I need behind door number 1 so that I can have the same $40,000, $80,000 income that we're accustomed to for the next 20, 30 years? That's a question. We have to do the math. And if we are already retired, like one couple we have the pleasure of working with, they're not rich. They have $5 million, but it just turns out with that 4% withdrawal rate, it's $200,000 a year. And that allows them to live just the way they lived when they were working for the money. So it keeps them smiling and it keeps us smiling. So what have we been doing over the past month? Reaching out to clients. That's what Jasmine has been doing to get their input. Are you taking on too much risk? Shall we reassess the risk that you're taking? And many of them have dialed down the risk, but now they have, a reality check. And that's what I'm talking about with number 3. Some people say, well, I can live with a 50% loss. And then they're down to 22 and they're like, oh, I lied. Fix this. I don't need any more of that. I lied. Okay. And review your real world risk tolerance. What kind of losses, I say, can you live with? That's a personal question. The only right answer is your answer. All right. So we'll open up for questions at the end, but in the meantime, I want to get my good friend Terri Hilliard Olson up because as I say, we've been working with Terri, and we love working with Terri because there are just a lot of issues that go on with families, particularly with the parents. Now the kids have to come together and make some tough decisions. What about long-term care? What about the house? Is there going to be nursing care? Is it going to be skilled care? And there are differences between those two. Is there a way where compensation for the services that need to be provided is paid for by an entity where you happen to live. That's the kind of thing that Terri's really adept at, because there may be funds out there that you didn't know how to tap into that she can help do so. So let me give you a little background. Terri is, her practice centers on advanced estate and business succession planning, asset protection, special needs trust, and family protection. Her firm offers unbiased assistance in how to locate quality nursing homes and assisted living resources, including strategies for how to pay for long-term care. She is the author, co-author of a book, did I get that right? Yeah, Protecting Your Legacy, what you really need to know for the second half of life. So Terri, take it from here, please.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here. So my first slide is that you're not alone. 5 tips with aging parents at this most difficult time. So it may be parents, it may be other loved ones, aunts, uncles, spouses. You never know when people are difficult, and it's a difficult time. Next slide. So what's happening here is we talk about there's a rupture in your norm. And what our norm is, what does our life look like? And everything seems to be turned upside down. We're all missing touch and connectedness. We can't be arm in arm, can't see each other eye to eye, 6 feet apart. Many times we are in another state, another town, or we're staying safe at home when we're not able to take care of or be part of our loved ones' day-to-day family life because things are preventing it. So we need to learn how to, because we're disconnected, we need to know how to reconnect in a different way. And as shared on 60 Minutes on Sunday, I think that seems to be a theme today. We can't set up the pins in the bowling alley the same way. And I think that's a very good analogy. We just have to do it differently. We might be virtually bowling now. And so how do we do that? And, Americans are very innovative. And I think I've mentioned many times in other talks that we need to take a COVID pivot. We need to pivot. We need to look at things differently. How do we connect? There's a raging, I think, mental health crisis right now, or it's coming. We're looking at that curve. This curve might be more concerning. We need to do different things like adding Zoom social calls, family and friend calls. Those are really important. We also need to look at the new norm, which would be multi-generational management from afar. How do we do that with the 3 to 4 generations that we might be managing? We need to diversify, like John said. We might be diversify our portfolio, but we might need to also diversify how we connect and manage our well-being. John had said, add legs under your stool. I think that's really important. We need to look at the foundation. Everything looks different. We need to start from the bottom, say, what do we have? We have each other, we have our love, we have our health, we have a house, we have food. What else do we need? How do we support ourselves? Next slide, please. So what does your personal and family pivot look like? And I think that's really important. One story I wanted to share with you as an example is there's a family here in Los Angeles, and their parents are in New York in assisted living. They have no other relatives nearby. Now what? What can they put in place? Some of us have our loved one not in New York, or they're maybe down the road living alone. Either one is a very difficult situation. In the instance where the family is in assisted living, well, those situations, they're locked down right now, and it's very difficult to get information. What could they have done, or what can they do now? Many times they're delivering iPads for communication. They are using care managers on the ground where you can actually enlist someone to check on your loved one. So you need to check in. You can call our office, or someone like myself. We have other suggestions. We have colleagues that are in different states that could help with, number one, maybe changing their estate documents to make sure that you have access to their healthcare directive and HIPAA form, and creating a way to drop off maybe communication devices. Maybe the Amazon Echo is the one that people are using these days. Next slide. So I have 5 success tips with aging parents and loved ones. If you are at this workshop and are listening in today, you are the one. You are the enforcer is my term I like to use. You're the responsible one. You're the caregiver. You're the designated hitter. Or you may be, besides the caregiver's spouse. If you are likely all of the above. The most important tip is to start with self-identifying. Your bonus tip is identify yourself as a caregiver. Just because you're the communication liaison, or you are in charge of someone's medical well-being, you are that person. You are a caregiver, and we need to look at that. Next slide, please. So tip number 1, put your mask on first. And that's kind of something we really look at right now, because we're always now we have to use masks. We have to look and see, have I put my mask on first? And how are you really? We use the term, how are you? But we need to use the term, I think, how are you really? So when we look in the mirror in the morning, how am I really? If you're not well and you're not able to take good care of you, you will be useless to your family or friends who need your assistance. What is your self-care and family routine? It's really important to maybe write that down. What can I do to take good care of me? Maybe I need to do a virtual yoga class, or the like, just take a moment for myself. We now call it PPE, personal protective equipment. That's what you need to look at. What is my personal protective equipment? Maybe that's a bubble around me. Maybe it's taking a break. Doing a Zoom, what we call quarantini, and most of our friend time. Do a quarantini with friends, do a phone session with a therapist, reach out to your doctor, make sure you are well taken care of. There are virtual caregiver support groups. And again, we need to self-identify that we are a caregiver, even if it's just a portion of someone's care, and even if it's a shared task. What about taking a long walk? What about taking a long bath? Talk to yourself. A break is always as good as a rest, as my mom would say. Also, there are community, sometimes we need virtual respite, and you need to ask for help. Here locally, we have Senior Concerns of the Caneo, of which I am on the board. We serve locally to make sure that there's shopping for our loved ones that are shut-ins, shopping and drop-off, Meals on Wheels, and new programs that the governor has created for nutrition. Raise your hand. You don't have to be impoverished to say, I need help. It's really important. And this might be for your loved one. You might reach out in their community to find out what resources are available where Meals on Wheels can be taken to their home. And so they don't have to go out. That shopping can be done, prescriptions can be picked up. There are many volunteers in all communities, especially ours here, to make sure that your loved one is well taken care of. And maybe it's you. Maybe you need an extra dinner. It's hard to cook for ourselves all the time with the stressors of taking care of children, with teaching children, of taking care of our loved ones, our friends and family, and making sure that communication continues. Next slide. So, sorry. Next one is evaluate, how are you really? How are they really? We must really stay in the now. So when we're working with our loved ones, we have to not only put our mask on, but make sure that they have what they need. Many times I've had situations where they keep losing their mask, they keep losing their dentures. I'm so frustrated. It happens. So the most important thing is looking at our mental health, also looking at their physical health. What is happening now? Because of the stressors, their health may very well change. So we need to take a check-in, and we need to understand their conditions, physical and mentally. We must understand, if they have to stay in, what does that look like? The past and the future are really irrelevant right now. We need to stay in the moment. That is the biggest tip. We need to virtually check under the hood and get a good reading so we can support our loved one. And I've been reminded that the most important thing is to drive carefully. It's not only cars that can be recalled by their makers. It could be our maker. So many times our family members can be very frustrating to us, and especially if you can't give them a hug or reach out or to use the tools that we usually use with them. Sometimes they can be alienated by some of the things that we do, and we don't want them to succumb to predators, because there are many predators out there that they unwittingly befriend, and that could really pose a problem financially and otherwise to our loved ones and family members. Next slide, please. Tip number 3, have your legal and financial ducks in a row. The most important documents for any adult person, and might be aunt, uncle, friend, or adult children. Do they have an advanced healthcare directive? Do they have they appointed you or someone else to be that person in an emergency? If they're admitted to the hospital, what happens? Who gets to make decisions? If you do not have an advanced directive, you will likely be required to get a conservatorship for that person. That means going to court, having to share with the court why you need to be the one, and you might not be the one. They may have selected you unofficially, but an advanced healthcare directive should be updated if you can make sure that you are that person, and that there's a backup to you, because what if you get sick? Next is a HIPAA form, and that's a document that is important to authorize the release of health information that's protected otherwise. Doctors and nurses and medical staff and even care communities cannot share with you the condition of your loved one without that form. And so you can actually have a HIPAA form that you don't have to have your loved one be incapacitated, but instead this HIPAA form allows you to call the nurses station and say, what's happening for my loved one? Next, power of attorney is really essential. And that says who's going to be able to, while your loved one is ill or not able to do it for themselves, not accessible, if they're in the hospital or let's say in a nursing home that's shut down right now, not shut down but closed to you, maybe we need a power of attorney for financial matters. Who's going to do the minimum distributions at the end of the year? Who's going to sign their tax returns? Who's going to deal with Social Security? Who's going to apply for Medi-Cal, which we do at our office? Who's going to be able to do that? If you don't have the authority to sign that person's signature on their behalf or get that information, you will be stopped and you will be again in court with a conservatorship for them. Next, many people have a trust, and we want to make sure that if things are held in trust, are you able to step in even temporarily as a successor trustee to pay their bills, to manage their money, to make sure they're well taken care of. Also making sure that if you're working with John, you want to make sure that you have access to financial accounts for your loved one under certain circumstances. There's ways to get financial authority. It's really essential to have those documents in place. Next slide, please. So, tip number 4, have your emergency and communication kit ready. So many of us have experienced out here in California fires. So do you have an emergency kit ready? In that emergency kit, you may very well want to add, what if I have to go to the hospital? Do I need a bag? Do I need, for my loved ones, also to have that emergency kit? What do you need? You need your legal documents. You also need your devices. You might need your phone charger. That's something that is always something we're looking for at our house. Making sure you have an extra device. Maybe you need one of those Amazon Echoes that I mentioned earlier to make sure that you can call my husband, bring over my slippers, and or drop them off at the front of the assisted living. You never know what you're going to need, and you might need that for your loved ones as well. Make sure you have your prescription list, a surplus of additional medications that you might need. Make sure that you have all the legal documents so that you can actually order things from the pharmacy or check in and say, I'm not sure that my loved one from afar is doing well on that medication. Does it need to be changed? Can you tell me what kind of side effects there are? These are things that are really essential. And when you're away, you might want to deal with a care manager or care coordinator in that town to be you in your absence. Next slide. So tip number 5, communication pivots for sanity. So many of us have loved ones who may not be as easy to deal with as they have been, or maybe their health has changed and or their emotional state or cognitive ability. We work a lot with dementia and Alzheimer's individuals and their families, and things change on a dime. Many times we need to worry about a health change, like a urinary tract infection can cause many changes in mental ability temporarily, and we think, oh my gosh, my loved one has dementia. Maybe not. Maybe we need to check in, and the ability to have the right financial and health documents will be essential to make sure that we take care of one another. The most important, again, is making sure that your loved one has a hearing or other assisted devices for their phones or their computers or their TVs, making sure that they're well taken care of. When we have situations where our loved one sometimes is having cognitive changes, maybe that would be they believe that they're living somewhere else, if they're in assisted living. They're arguing about things that are happening that may not be really happening in the assisted situation. Sometimes we need to just take a pause, and we need to live their truth, because it really doesn't matter what is really happening. We need to evaluate whether they're in harm's way or if these things are true, but let's say they aren't, and they're having a cognitive change or a hallucination or the like. We need to live their truth. Arguing about the facts and what is really so may not serve either of you. This is a very stressful time for everyone, so sometimes we need to take a pause. Next, we are all frustrated right now, and including our loved one that we may be caring for. And so we need to focus on the not I, but the we. We are all, we're all, Mom, we're really all frustrated at, how hard it is to get our laundry, or we are all frustrated. And so when it's a we, it makes it much easier than when it's a you or an I. Also, we want to look at what do they love to do. So sometimes we need to change conversations to, what they want to reminisce a little bit about. And I know many of us are tired of sometimes hearing the same stories. I don't know about you, but sometimes we hear the same stories. And we're just going to have to take a moment and enjoy it, because we may not in the future, or even soon if they get sick, ever hear those stories again. So sometimes we need to take a pivot for our sanity and hear it again, or maybe we need to change things around and deflect or divert to a new subject for everybody's peace of mind. So the key is don't argue, but also you can divert to something else. You can convert that, again, making a pivot. The other thing we find helpful is just be gentle on yourself and maybe finding the funny in it. Sometimes we do something funny, like my daughters were always wearing socks that didn't match. I don't know about you, I'm sure you've experienced that. And I would get frustrated. And then I finally gave it up and I just said, how about that? That's one of my favorite sayings. How about that? How about that? How about that? And it seemed to really help not confront and just go, does it really matter that they have mismatched socks? So you're going to find that with your loved one as well, that they're not fully dressing properly, that things don't match, when they used to be a really amazing dresser and fastidious. Maybe it's not that important. We need to find the funny in it. And so maybe we can find things that would make us all laugh and move forward. Let's talk about sex. So maybe you don't want to talk about it, but in assisted livings, you will find that they have the highest percentage of sexually transmitted diseases. And the interesting part about that is that, you know, we can live differently. Well, right now, we may have loved ones that are exhibiting behaviors that are probably not healthy for them, or maybe dangerous, because they really shouldn't be close to one another. You'll find that in the assisted livings, many of the individuals are locked down in their rooms, and that might be one of them. So don't be embarrassed to talk about that in relationships, because if there's cognitive differences in some of the communities, this is something that we might have to talk about. Next, many of our loved ones are wandering, they're combative, they may exhibit hoarding behaviors, and that may be very, very frustrating for us. So we're going to need to find safe ways to manage that. And the combative, you know, maybe there is a way to check with their doctors to see if maybe the medications need to be changed, or maybe medications need to be added. The one thing that I know about hoarding, which seems to be a very frustrating thing for many family members, where, you know, it's very difficult for the loved one to move around the home, because it's a trip or fall risk, because they're creating collections of items that they don't need, in our opinion. I think it's really important to look at that. And if you Google hoarding, many times they're seen as it being from a trauma from an earlier part in their life. So we have to look at this, be compassionate, figure this out, and maybe get some assistance with care managers or people that have the skills that can actually help with this issue. Our loved ones, we get very frustrated because they lose things often. And so I think the key is to replace those items. Many times it's very costly to replace dentures or glasses or hearing aids, and I find that our families are reluctant to do that. This is the 27th one, we can't afford it anymore. Hopefully we can get some insurance on those items, but I think it's really important because their well-being, their mental health, their brain health, their personal health, if they don't have the proper teeth, the hearing devices or glasses, it could be a really big problem. So we really need to manage that well and find the funny in it, I hope. It's really, really essential to get those done. We also need to just realize as a final thing is that our mood affects their mood. Just like if I arrive in my office in a grumpy mood, my entire staff feels it. And so that just doesn't happen around here. You have to get your game face on, and you need to make sure that your loved one knows how much you love them, find the funny in it, and change your mood, changes the mood for everyone involved. So Daniel, do you have anything else, or does anybody have any questions for me?
All right, Terry, we do have a couple questions that came in. First one, what signs should you look for cognitive decline?
That's a great one. Well, there are typical changes, like changes in their planning or problem solving ability. Under stress, it's going to be worse right now. So look to see if they're having trouble following a familiar recipe. So some of our family members are great cooks and then they just stop cooking. That would be an interesting sign. They're having a hard time keeping track of their bills. Things are not being paid properly. They're not opening their mail. They're not picking up the phone. Sometimes they're very good at hiding it from us. So it's really important to make sure we're good investigators, and just doing check-ins, like checking the oil in our car. Sometimes they have difficulty with time or place, and so they may have trouble understanding, what's happening next in a series. Sometimes they have trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships, so how far the table is away from them. So many times there's difficulty in balance, ability to determine color or contrast. In the assisted livings today, they actually have specific colors that they use so that it's easier for our loved ones to see where they're eating and what, making so their, let's say, place setting and their table setting more inviting, because sometimes they just stop eating because they forgot that they didn't eat, or they continue to eat. They're always at the refrigerator. So we can see that those changes, and maybe we can see it through our Zoom calls and the like. Also, they're having problems finding words, or speaking or writing has changed. Maybe they stopped doing their crossword puzzles. Many times we need to be able to talk to their doctors about that. And maybe they're misplacing things like losing their hearing aids, their dentures, their glasses, etc. Many of us do that, or we go into a room and then we forgot why we were there. That's normal. However, if it happens often, or sometimes they just get in the car and go, where was I going to go? Or they have a hard time figuring out how to put their jacket on. Many times there's a decrease or poor judgment that occurs. They're inviting people into their home that are not safe. That happens a lot. And they start to withdraw because sometimes we know that we're having these issues and we don't want anybody to know. So they're very, very good at masking it. So it's very important for all of us to check in and to step in when needed to help out. Great
Excellent.
question.
Thanks, Terry. Next question is for you, John. Why don't you think there will be an L shape? I'm sorry. Why do you think the recovery might be L-shaped?
I love that question because we're hearing everything other than L. And the reason it intrigues me so much is because guess what? We've seen L twice in history, but we don't study history. We don't like math. So why would we go back to see what we can learn from the past? We'll just recreate it into the future. So after the Great Depression, it took 25 years for US equities to get back to even. 25 years. And at the same time, the New York real estate market dropped 70% and the stock market dropped 80%, 25 years for stocks to come back, 40 years for real estate in New York City to come back, 40 years, 4 decades. And please understand, this is the part that absolutely fascinates the heck out of me, and part of maybe one of the reasons why we keep studying this stuff, like the Great Depression, because in fact, Michio Kaku, author of a book right over here, says that depressions just happen every 80 years. And we want to go, oh, it can't ever happen. But let's also understand that the good news is that on a per capita basis, more Americans became millionaires after the Great Depression than any other time in history. So what's so awful about that? And then let's put it in further, put it in perspective even further by saying, maybe it is that the Fed wants you to believe they can set the dial and just make the room cool and warm using the machines. The economy is a function of people, okay? And it's not a machine. It just doesn't work that way. It's just not that simple. So it's fascinating to me that we saw, 40 years for real estate to come back, 25 years to come back. And at that time, if you were an adult in the early 1900s, life expectancy was mid-50s. Oh, so that means the prices came back long after we were pushing up daisies. That would be regretful. I had $2 million. The market took it to 100,000, 108,000 with Daniel's math. Real estate in New York dropped from 100,000 to about 300,000. So what was $2 million becomes 400,000 in about a year and a half or so, 30 months or so. Really? And you mean the prices didn't come back till long after we were dead? That would seem to me like we died with regret, because the prices never came back in our lifetime. So that's the first one. The second one's more recent, and it was just across the Pacific Ocean. Remember Japan? Remember in the late 80s, we all knew to a person that Japan was going to eat our lunch. We knew they were going to be #1 in gross domestic product. We were just fine with that. It's their turn, let them enjoy the sun, it's on their flag, it's good. Well, it seems as though on New Year's Eve, 1989, the Japanese, power just collapsed. I mean, like air out of a balloon overnight. And their stock market around beginning 1990, it was at 39,000, 1990. First leg down, remember some people say buy the dips. First leg down in Japan to 10,000. Second leg down with the Nikkei 225 to 7,000. That's an 80% loss. And the next year, it looks like the Japanese real estate market followed in the same pattern. It was down 70%. So now we'll do the numbers, but I love to put it like this. Which do you think got back to even? And I usually ask it's a trick question, trying to guide people to process this. You don't need to know the answer. If it's a trick question, then it's probably D, none of the above. Correcto. That is the correct answer. I was just looking at the Nikkei 225. Last time I looked, I think it was around 20,000. Remember, it was as high as 39,000. Went from 39 to 10 to 7. Now it's back to 20. It's still a far cry from 39, 40,000. This is 30 years later. Neither the stock market in Japan nor the real estate market in Japan have gotten back to even. And in doing our homework on this, I found one source that suggested, this was written in 2017, they thought that the Japanese real estate market would fully recover in 2025. Well, that was before COVID-19. And the piece of the puzzle that underscores all of this, I love it, it's Father Time and Mother Nature. They hold the real trump cards, that's with the small t. Globally, we now have more people 65 and older than 5 and younger. That's hard to wrap your mind around because it's never happened before. And I don't see that changing. So, where are these people that are going to come out of nowhere just to buy up everything? Because the truth is, maybe those of us who remember PF Flyers, they were supposed to make you run faster and jump higher. I don't think they did that, but I sure had a pair. And if we still have a pair of PF Flyers, what are we doing with them now? We're not running to anywhere, even the refrigerator. We're sitting our butts down and eating all the bonbons we possibly can. That pattern is pretty entrenched. So the peak spending happens when we have kids. And if everybody, for the most part, is over 65, they're not having kids, nobody else is having kids, there's not as many kids in the world as there used to be, and that's not changing. It just goes to show you that we want these, as I say, we wear these rose-colored glasses and drink the Kool-Aid, go, oh, it's just going to be back. Well, it wasn't so good to begin with, and maybe it's just going to be different, kind of like 911 globally. It's going to be different. I don't think we will ever see where we were again moving forward. So sorry. Sure, great question. Sorry the answer was so long.
That's okay. Okay, we're out of time, so let's move on.
Okay. So let's see. We're looking at our schedule, and I'm sorry I got a blank in there for the 10th. Let me go there first because that's bothering me. May 10th, we're going to have that's a psychologist that's going to talk about, Terry, you'll be interested in this, the 9 issues that patients are bringing to their therapist in the reality of COVID-19. And then on the 3rd, we're going to actually go into the details with passive versus active management by having one of the companies we do business with describe exactly what they're doing. For example, one of the companies we do business with started, invested, client money invested so that 100% of the account was in US equities at the beginning of November 19. But by month end, November 30th, 2019, it was in all cash. That's exactly an example of what we're talking about. It's not for everybody, but you know, when people are worried about their accounts and you see that the money's already sitting in cash and you didn't have to do anything and the account just did it for you, it's, you know, for me, it's hallelujah, because we can rest and not have to worry about clients going cuckoo. And then next week, we've got a really great guy who's a business coach. I don't mean to mom and pop, you know, hamburger stands. This guy is a coach to businesses where the annual revenue is in the neighborhood of $20 million. And he's going to talk about how to make your business roar. And we're going to put roar in all caps because it's an acronym that he uses in his presentations. And Terry talked about how much it's just changed recently. I've seen his presentation change dramatically just in the last 4 or 5 weeks. So he's really up to speed and on the ball for all of us to get a sense for, regardless of what COVID does and what, you know, things might turn out, how can we be okay and not just survive but thrive? So yeah, if you weren't prepared for the last 2 months, you probably aren't prepared for the next 20 years. So we're going to suggest that you take the time, meet with folks like Terry to help your family be well prepared and help you feel good about the decisions you're making. It won't be easy, I can promise you. It's just part of the equation, this thing called life. And financially, how can you be prepared for the good, the bad, and the unforeseen? So we want to thank you for joining us. And, you know, Daniel, if you don't have anything else, I'll say that here's to your good health and your good wealth.
Thank you, Aris.
Thanks so much, Terry.
Thank you. Very interesting, John. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Was that, did you, certainly different, I suspect, of what you've heard some of my peers say, do?
I think you're right on that.
Yeah.